I know a girl from the Delaware. She stands apart from the crowd. She loves her podcast and her friends. She makes her own best friend proud. Sometimes I don't know the rest of the words. I'm going to leave it there.
The Delaware?
Yes.
Oh my god.
It's only one more syllable.
No, it's not the syllable. The Delaware's gross. I don't want to be from the Delaware.
Well, all right, then you and Erin are going to have words because she got on my case about that.
About what?
The Delaware being clean and the Susquehanna being the gross one.
Okay, listen. There are there are bodies in there.
There's bodies in every water. Do you know how old this country is?
Yeah. But there are, like, recent bodies in there. Like... Oh, well,
yeah,
I'm saying that,
yeah,
like,
that doesn't
I don't
stop people from kayaking the fucking Hudson.
I know, that's true. Yeah, I say that like I don't have, like, a tubing trip planned very soon, and I do. Anyway, it was jarring. That, like, of everything you just did, you mentioning the Delaware River was the most, like, visceral reaction I had to that whole thing.
Surely one of my worst in terms of the lyrics will come to me. I just need the rhythm. And then the minute you lose the rhythm, the whole thing collapses in on itself like a dying star.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, welcome to the Disney Desk, everyone. Carter here.
And I'm Sydney, and welcome to the Patreon party.
The brand new Patreon party.
The brand new Patreon party. Welcome to our producers. Wow. How do you feel with your new titles?
Yes. Fancy.
Yeah. You guys have some power now.
Yes. So this is something we've wanted to do for a little bit, and we realized, we kind of, after a year-ish of doing the Patreon, I feel like we had a good sense of, what was working, what wasn't working, what we liked, what we didn't like.
Right.
And I think kind of just restructuring it to simultaneously, give you... I think it was less, the amount of content, and more just we want to have, I guess, I don't know, just kind of be able to focus more on less stuff.
That's exactly the way to put it.
I don't know if I can speak for you.
We had a lot of content, which was a positive thing. It was honestly a miracle that we were able to, stay organized and do as much as we have done over the last year of Patreon. But, we wanted higher quality work, which inadvertently meant sort of, less in terms, quality over quantity here. But we also, in a weird way, we had to kind of, shorten the list to make it more valuable for you guys. So, and that's really what we wanted. We always want our Patreon, but when we're asking you to give your hard-earned money to us for any reason, we are most concerned that, it feels like something we would pay for. It feels like you are getting value for what you're paying for, because we really do appreciate the support.
Right, and it kind of I think this episode is kind of the best embodiment of that, because I feel like as we got deeper and deeper into the Patreon, we weren't lending ourselves enough to just kind of sitting down and having a really long form analytical conversation about a movie.
Right.
I think when we first dreamed up the Patreon, episodes like this were kind of more what we wanted to go for, and then just because of circumstances, we kind of shifted gears away from that, just because time and effort and resources had to be spread more thinly.
Right.
It's funny because this really was one of the first 3 or 4 movies you referenced of we can do deep dives, this Hercules, Princess and the Frog, and this movie.
Right. And you know what? It's so it's been a couple weeks, probably a month, or no, more than a month, I guess you could say, since we've recorded an exclusive episode, and I am not for nothing here, I am forgetting how much work right. The effort that it takes to prepare 2 episodes for a week, and Carter, you and I can really pat ourselves on the back here. We hustled.
Yes, we really did put the work in for a while there, but we are excited to kind of have a refresh state, kind of have a little more room for interaction, a little more room for growth. And what better movie to kick that off than kind of like what I'm realizing more and more is kind of the Disney movie of this era.
It sure is. Like, again, if for those of you that have listened to our main feed episode, which hopefully you have by now, I mentioned the connection between Raya and the Last Dragon to Moana to Frozen. And, like, here's where, like, I feel like a lot of this discussion is going to be, like, sort of drawing the connective tissue between this and Frozen. And the reason why it feels so natural to be making those connections is honestly kind of like the fanfare after the fact. That this, I felt, kind of quickly, like, replaced Frozen on the throne of, like, things people are obsessed with.
I do listen to other people's podcasts about movies sometimes just to get a sense of like what other people talked about. And it's always so funny listening to people talk about Moana in the context of like, yeah, there are two movies that every parent with kids has had to put on nonstop for the past 5 years.
Yeah.
Frozen and Moana. And arguably Encanto's gotten added to that group. But like of those two, this Moana is kind of become the one where it's like, well, this is the great one. This is the best one.
It's the one that parents, like, don't complain so much about having to put on nonstop.
Right. I've never once seen someone make a meme about, like, if I have to hear How Far I Go one more time.
Right. Yeah, no. They're not complaining about it as if it were, like, do you want to build a snowman?
Yes. And if it wasn't clear from the fact that we referenced the movie title 3 times, we are talking about the 2016 movie Moana.
Oh, yeah, baby. Now, we have, like, a really interesting backstory.
An actual history with this.
An actual history with this movie. Like, should we start there of, like, how we came to see this?
Yes, that's always a safe spot to start.
I remember this very, very distinctly, because it was a very, 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 distinct day in history, in U.S. history.
Yes.
It was, okay, like, I'm trying to reference Golden Girls here, where she's like, 1934, Sicily, picture it, like, but it was the night of the 2016 election. This is the night before.
Yes.
We're waiting.
I can't believe, I thought there was a bigger gap between when we saw it and, like, the actual election. I can't believe it really was, like, the next day.
It was the next day. This is the
evening. Audacity of Disney to schedule preview fan screenings of this movie.
I know.
The day before after an election.
Yeah. It was the night of the 2016 election. I remember I had, like, run to Wawa to stress eat. Because, like, the numbers were coming in, baby, and they just weren't looking so good. I don't know.
It really was a hell of a thing. The minute the numbers started coming in, immediately everyone realized, like, oh, fuck.
This is actually going to happen. This isn't a joke. Like,
right.
This is going to happen.
You know, Nate Silver of 538 now has kind of lost his luster because he's kind of, like, gone out to sea and is kind of like a Colonel Kurtz-esque figure. But, like, you know, he was adamant of, like, hey, you know, the odds are the election's going to go a certain way, but there is a narrow window, like a 30% window, where this very specific scenario of pieces lands. And if that happens, then the result is going to be shocking.
Right.
And one by one, those scenarios just start happening, and you're like,
right.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. It was, and I, like, it gave me Super Bowl energy of, like, even, like, most Super Bowls are, like, close games. Am I wrong with that? Has there ever been a Super Bowl that was, like, a complete blowout? But, like, there's always a moment in every Super Bowl.
It's not that common.
Even when the outcome of a Super Bowl comes out the way you want it, like, you have a quarter of being like, my life is ruined.
Yeah.
and I remember distinctly, like, being in that mindset of, like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe we're losing to the Chiefs. I can't believe...
Right, it's like, God damn it, we had him.
Yeah, we had him.
Kadarius fucking Toney?
Yeah, come on now. So, anyway, yeah, James Bradbury, come on. Anyway, so the election happens. Welcome to 2024. I think you know what happens.
Yeah.
And the next day, And, like, all of this context matter. Like, I wouldn't be telling this story if I didn't think it had an effect on the way I reacted to this movie. Like, we kind of have to...
Right.
This is not in a vacuum.
No, this is the story of the movie.
This
is the story of this film's legacy.
Yeah. So, like...
You cannot tell the story of this movie without this.
In that night, you invited me to go out. Or it was either that night or the very next day. Because I remember, weirdly, I had a dentist appointment. And I last minute... like, canceled it the same day to do this. So it was, like, a last-minute thing. Do you remember how, like, can you tell a story about, like, the tickets themselves and, like, what the event actually was?
Yeah, so one of the perks of going to NYU and being in the film school is you kind of just get put on a lot of mailers for screenings. Like, you get a lot of perks and benefits, both on campus and off campus in the greater New York City area of, like, hey... so, you know, the film and TV department or the animation department has an inside track on, like, this early screening of a movie or this early screening of a show or this talk with a director. And you know, if you want to put your name in, we'll, like, get you a ticket. And that was, like, I got to see a lot of shit early, both from that and just the privilege of, like, working for the Washington Square News and just having the advantage of, like, I can pull my media credentials out if I want to see something. Obviously, there's a limit to that part. Like, they're not going to let you see Star Wars a month early. But, like, you know, it had advantages. And one of the ones from the animation department was just, hey, there are going to be some early fan screenings for Moana. Like, you know, because Disney likes to get the story out early. They like to have, like, a social media push. You know, you always see, like, a week before the movie comes out, all these people posting on social media, usually around the previews being like, this movie was fan-flippin-tastic. Usually it's very positive. You know, they try to examine it out a little bit to make sure it's like... yeah, flippin-tastic.
Yeah.
Like Maui when he's a shark.
Right.
But yeah, that's the energy they go for. They try to get, you know, Disney adults who they know, like, they're not going to be violent toward the movie. At worst, they'll be indifferent. They'll be like, it was good.
Yeah, exactly.
And I got an inside track for one of those, and it was the next day, and I'm like, that could be fun. You know, this is the first big princess movie, because, like, that was right when I was getting back into Disney. It was Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, and then it's like, let's go. And the fact that it was a new princess movie, I'm like, hell yeah.
Does my memory serve me, or was this before we officially started podcasting? I think it was before.
Before.
Yeah. So
yes,
this predates the Disney desk.
A year later, I think.
When we were doing this shit for nobody, just for each other. Yeah. I would argue sometimes we still are
for the grind.
Doing it for each other.
Yeah.
We're back where we were doing it for the vine, we used to say. I had to.
Before we sold out.
Hollywood.
God, I'm gonna be honest. Like, the way my life is going, Disney. If you want us to be shills, I will sell the fuck out
I don't care.
So hard.
I get it.
Yeah,
I'd be the first in line to do that. Come on now, like,
right. In terms of, like, things you can sell your soul to make money, I would much rather do that than be one of those far right grifters who's always bitching about gay people and stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Like, straight up, like, at least there's a little honor in this of, like, 100 years of animation tradition. But anyway, so I was like, you know, the election will happen. We'll go see a movie after, and it'll be fun. And I do think it was like, they're like, oh, you have a guest ticket if you want. So I just go, I think at some point that night I just go, like, or was it the same day, did I ask you? I
want to say it was the next morning. Because I remember, I had to, like, change my appointment, like, really quickly. So that makes me think that it was the next day.
Right. And I think I said something like, hey, man, I know this probably isn't the best time. Because I think this also, in terms of our friendship, was around the time I think we really realized we were best friends. Because as close as we were college, my freshman year, we didn't talk that much. We would, like, check in every now and then, but we weren't, like, regular conversing.
It was, like, the beginning of that, I guess you could say.
Sophomore year, the switch happened.
Yeah, where we were just exclusively, I talked to you every day. Yeah. For those of you that don't know, like, Carter and I have, like, you're one of the people that I speak to every day. Like, that's just a thing. We just check in.
Yeah. Even if it's like, even in a scenario where it's like we haven't messaged each other, one of us will just make a point to be like, hey, hope your day went well.
Hi, what did you do today? Yeah, like, that'll always happen.
Because it feels inappropriate not to do that.
And like that started years ago. Yeah, like it's like
Yeah, and honestly, I would argue this is one of the first big moments of that. This
instances
was
of
like one of
that.
our first like things we did as friends post high school,
Yeah,
where it's like we have no obligation to hang out; we're choosing to hang out.
right.
Yeah, and I
So
just go, hey, probably not the best time, but I got a ticket to go
yeah.
see Moana if you're down for that.
And I was down. I remember like not hesitating even for one moment. I was like, "Yep, I want to go to do that." Because I also like thought it was cool. We got to take advantage of a few of your NYU perks, like getting to like our first episode was recorded in like an actual studio.
Yes,
that
we
was
used
cool.
like one of the booths they have when you need to do ADR and stuff.
Yeah. So, but anyway, like, do you remember the energy like of the next day? Like, maybe I'm being
Yes.
dramatic, but like it was dystopian.
It was like a city that constantly has noise that always has something to do was weirdly hollow that day.
Yeah. There was this like there was like a mutual like sadness. Like it felt like grieving and like on a nationwide scale, but like you felt it everywhere. There yeah, like that's the best way to put it. Like there was a sort of quietness. Even like when we were like walking
Yeah.
down the street or like waiting places, like there
'Cause
was
even,
this
like,
like
a lot of
disbelief.
even like the sort of twerpy, lame NYU Republicans who I like went to their meetings and immediately it was like, oh, making jokes about Obamacare and like just the lowest common, and I'm like, so you're not serious people, all right.
No.
And like even they had sort of a weird energy to them because I do think they're like, oh, this is the consequence. Like we put
got
so
what I
many eggs
wanted.
in this basket. If he lost, we could have been martyrs.
Yeah.
Now the consequences of this could actually become very real, very fast for everyone.
Right.
And I guess fortunate for them is those consequences never came because we had then proceeded to elect Joe Biden.
Right.
I don't know. I also just feel weird talking about this time because I remember when we met up, like everyone was in line kind of like, there was an excitement of like, well, we're going to see a movie, you know?
Yeah.
And you were like more, I think I was more like, well, the institutions will come in. This can't stand. Obviously, something went wrong with this election. And I maintain that. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Henry Reid died insisting that the election was illegitimate and we needed to audit the voting machines. And he was the one guy who kept it real. So
Right.
I'm willing to believe him.
You know what weird thing I remember very clearly, and this has nothing to do with the election about that day. Like, I was like, okay, so it was at an AMC. And it was like, I
Yeah.
remember us being kind of near Broadway.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which AMC it would have been. It wouldn't have been the one around Union Square. That would have been too close. I think it was further up. It might have been like it wasn't at 50th, was it? It wasn't.
That sounds about
I'm trying
right.
to think of the AMCs. There's the AMC near Herald Square and Penn Station. I don't think it was that one. There's the one near
No.
Union Square. I think that was a little too low. Is there like God, was it near Kips?
I remember us being like I remember us coming out and be like ending up on Broadway.
Yeah, I think it was close because I was like, oh, I'll walk you to the train so you can get home.
We got Chinese food, didn't we?
Oh, yeah, we did.
Yeah, we had dinner.
We did get food.
But like, anyway,
yeah.
the thing I remember was that like the food at the AMC was so cheap. Like, and I wasn't expecting that. Like, because it's so like, why is it like that? Like, do you think is that always the case? Like we got our usual like popcorn, drinks, candy, and it was only like $11.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, at home,
Which was funny because then they're like, oh, here's a little bag of popcorn too from Disney. And we're like, shit.
yeah, and like, but at our home theater out here in the suburbs, it's like $30 to get that stuff. And I remember being like, whoa.
I don't know, man. I think they factor in tickets are more expensive.
Yeah, they probably are. But and then we got our cell phones confiscated at the door.
Yes,
they were
they
like,
put
put
them
it
in
in the bag. No phones.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
don't try anything funny.
They had
in the
guys
seat.
at the door like, hand it over. Give me your phone. And we're like, okay, sorry. Like, but they were
And
like,
then we're just sitting there.
having to talk to each other. Yeah, like everyone was like, well, here we go.
And-
Like I've never been without my
Yeah.
phone.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Especially at a time like this.
at a time like that, it was probably the best gift that they could have given us was to take our phones away.
Oh, man, it really was wild. I just remember because I had Sci-Fi Lit the next day, and he was like, I want to, and it was before the election, obviously, the class started, but he's like, I kind of want to focus on sort of like dystopian fiction. So we were doing like Handmaid's Tale, which is vaguely sci-fi, like Fahrenheit, Day of the Triffids, which is like a very dry British novel about sentient plants and everyone's gone blind from an aurora borealis.
Nice.
Which I was like, don't look up tonight,
Nope.
guys. But, you know, the road. And he just comes in, just sits down and goes, well. And then he just goes, honestly, cards on the table. If you just need a day, I'm not going to mark you guys absent. Like, I respect that you showed up. So,
Yeah. Anyway.
But, yeah, and then we watched the movie.
All
and I
this
do feel like
to
our response
say-
was muted afterwards.
Really? Because, like, I feel like I was like, well, obviously this is my new favorite thing.
I was like, it's really good. I definitely needed time to, like, be like, oh, this is actually peak of this era.
It takes me very little to, like, be attached to something, though. And, like, this is, like, very much up my alley. But, like, you have to give it context that, like, in hindsight, when I look back at this, I'm like, even though to this day I think this is a fantastic film, was my enthusiasm, like, motivated by a desire for escapism? Yes.
Well, I would argue the reverse. I feel like it took forever for this movie to get its emphatic standing as, like, one of the best in Disney. Because
That's true.
it got lost. Mm-hmm. It just got completely lost in the slurry.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't think anyone was in a mental headspace to evaluate anything correctly.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And look at us now.
And look at us now.
And Moana 2 picked the perfect fucking release date.
Right. Yeah, it's...
But... You know what's funny? That is, like, and I know we actually have to talk about the movie, but that's the other... I have one other big premiere story from my time in New York. My friend Sarah, who I don't know if she watches the podcast or not, she got tickets to go see the opening night, or, like, the New York premiere of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice.
Really?
And we went, and they really sold you on the goodies. Like, they gave you free sodas, they gave you a big box of popcorn, they gave you a little, like, fake airplane because their sponsor deal was Turkish Airlines, and, like, all the actors were there, and all the Suicide Squad actors there, because they were really pushing. It's, like, back to back. The whole DCEU is getting set up. And, you know, they all go to their corners, or they go either leave the theater because they're not actually watching it. Except Will Smith, who insists on staying in the aisle and just, like, everyone coming up, he's like, handshake, autograph, photo, and I'm like, that's why I've always defended Will Smith, because I'm like, you know what, he is a real one. He knows where he came from. He knows, like,
he's America's
he
actor.
hasn't lost touch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, they finally are like, come on, dude, we got to start the movie. And I just remember sitting there in this muted theater, and then coming out to, like, all these photos being taken. There was all these, like, people outside the theater being like, yeah! And it was like, you know, it was oh my God, I'm literally forgetting what the place, where the Rockettes are.
Radio City?
Yes, thank you. I blanked. And then me and Sarah walk 4 blocks, get out of the noise, and she just goes, that sucked, right? And I go, oh, thank God. I didn't want to say anything in case you liked it. But
Right.
holy shit, man.
I didn't want to say it in front of Will Smith.
Yeah, I can't imagine he even remembers being in this fucking movie. He's the one guy who didn't get the tattoo.
Right.
Because he's like, I smell a
No.
stinker when I see one.
Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of history, should I, like, kick off this episode just kind of talking about the history of this movie?
I think so.
Yeah, so, like, when we do these deep dive episodes, I always try to think of, like, a framing device. I always try to think of, like, a sort of narrative arc. But the biggest one for this is Frozen broke the mold. Now what? I do feel like with this movie there was an energy of, like, Frozen's whole thing was, like, leaning into the enchanted energy of, like, we're dressing down princess tales. We're subverting expectations. She's not going to fall in love with the first guy she meets. It's actually the love between sisters that saves
with
the
the
day.
second guy she meets.
Fuck yeah. This ain't your mommy's princess tale.
Yeah.
And yeah, and kind of to the attached to that is, like, sort of the guys who made the mold are doing one last ride. It's the last dance of Musker and Clemens. It's so funny. So much of our Patreon has been colored by John Musker and Ron Clemens. I might have gotten their first names. No, it is Musker, Ron Clemens, and John Musker. I always get them mixed up. But anyway, like, you know, we've done Princess and the Frog, we've done Hercules, we talked about Treasure Planet on the mainline feed. We've done already, like, half of their filmography. And this is the last film they did as a team before kind of technically retiring. They still do their own stuff, but they don't really work together anymore. Basically, like, after Princess and the Frog, there was no idea that they were done after that. This wasn't like the Miyazaki thing of, like, oh, I'm retired, and then 5 years later he's like, actually. Like, you know, once they got brought back for Princess and the Frog, and there was at least the promise of the 2D studio staying open, like, it seems like they immediately began working again. Bleeding Cool News reported around 2010, that used to be like an old Scoops site. I don't think it exists anymore. They were really talking about them working on a film called Mort. Are you familiar with Mort at all?
No.
Mort is a part of Terry Pratchett's Discworld, which has always been sold to me as like, hey kids, you love Harry Potter and you want another young adult fantasy novel but can no longer stomach J.K. Rowling's horrible personality? Well, I have the series for you! And Mort specifically is about like a teenage kid who becomes the apprentice for Death, like the Grim Reaper, as personified as Cloak Skull Guy.
Right.
By all accounts, it is charming. There have been a few like animated shorts centered in Discworld that have Death as a character, and they're very charming. Yeah, they apparently worked on this for a while. There's a lot of great concept art of it. It was going to be co-written by the guy who did Shrek, and then they just could never get the rights. Apparently, the Pratchett estate was just very like, I don't know. And that resulted in Disney being like, okay, new plan, original pitches only. Give us a couple original pitches. And the only one that we know about is Musker ended up, for some reason, reading about Polynesian mythology and getting really caught up on Maui, which makes sense because he simultaneously is like, he's kind of simultaneously a lot of things. Maui as a character is part creation myth. A lot of his mythology is around like explaining certain things, like how the New Zealand islands got created because he wanted to prove he was the best fisherman in his family. He's part trickster god. So many of his stories have sort of like a sort of
Loki
chaotic
energy.
scamp energy to them. Yeah. And he also is like a bit Hercules because it's established, like he's not considered like a god as in like an ethereal, untouchable being, but more as like a guy. He's a guy who's around.
Demigod.
Yes, he did stuff.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that like coming off of, doing Hercules, they would be attracted to this story again. And I don't know. It is always interesting to me because Disney does have a history with Polynesia. Like, in terms of, like, it's sort of, like, for lack of a better word, sort of aesthetics. Again, they have the Polynesian Resort. They have the Enchanted Tiki Room. Like, the Enchanted Tiki Room, which is so integral to Disney. Kevin made it a plot point in his D&D campaign, realizing he's not as versed in
all
the
things.
parks.
Yeah.
Yes. But, yeah, so, like, they've always had this relationship with Polynesian stuff, but in that problematic, like, what we were talking about, sort of the whiteification of it, where it's like, tikis, hula skirts, bodacious babes.
Do a dance. Yeah.
Submissive women tropes.
Right.
Cocoa nuts.
Bugs Bunny for some reason.
Yes. Oy vey.
I know, sorry.
But... yeah, so John Lasseter is like, well, if you want to do this, you gotta travel to the area. You gotta study the area.
You gotta go on vacation.
Yeah, vacation. Like all these movies. And John Lasseter's pushing it because he knows if there's one way he can constantly escape the consequences of his bad behavior, it's to bribe people with stuff.
It's like, what if I gave you all the Hawaiian shirts you could ever want?
Please don't tell anyone that I was weird around the kids playing the fairies and the Tinkerbell thing.
Right.
Anyway, the actual story. So, yeah, they ended up doing all of these trips to Fiji, Samoa, Tahiti, New Zealand at some point. And this is kind of like... basically, the original pitch for the movie was like kind of a Maui-centric thing. It was very much like, hey, we want to do cool stuff with this cool, like... action hero guy, like another superhero story. And as they kept going there, they kind of realized, like, okay, that kind of can't be the story. There's a great quote from someone named Papa Mappy, who was, like, apparently just, like, a community leader. And he said, "For years, we've been swallowed by your culture. For once, could you be swallowed by our culture?" And that sort of became a part of the onus to pivot it to, like, oh, we want to tell a story about someone... like, Maui can be a part of the story, but he's not the main character. And ultimately, what kind of became, like, the spark moment where they realized what the actual story is was they learned about the Great Pause. So, at some point in Polynesian history, they'd been exploring for over 2,000 years, kind of like the greatest explorers to ever exist, like, doing stuff that Vikings and, like, European colonists would not achieve for literal centuries. But then they just stopped, somewhere around Fiji, which is what Montanui's kind of supposed to be.
Gotcha.
They just stopped traveling for 1,000 years, and there's really no recorded explanation for why that is. Like, there's guesses that it might have involved, like, current changes, climate changes, but for some reason they just stopped doing that, and then quietly restarted. So that kind of
Oh,
became the like core of the plot. They're just like, let us do sort of an aspirational story about a young girl. They described it as a true grit narrative, a determined young girl who teamed up with a down-on-his-luck trickster, a hero story with a female character. And the idea is like, oh, that's what was centered the story around. How does the great pause end? And all of that kind of leads them into kind of what we were talking about with Raya, the Oceanic Story Trust. This is the first movie where they really pushed the idea of, hey, we are doing a story in a culture that is not sort of European or Americanized.
right.
But don't worry, because we have brought in a group of experts, people with know-how, people with knowledge.
And the guy who did Hamilton. You like Hamilton, right?
Yeah. Well, we will get to that when we talk music, but yeah, and like they kind of give some like broad examples of how this applied. Like apparently originally there was a scene where Moana's just golf balling coconuts in frustration, and someone was like, "No, she wouldn't do that." And if she did, the consequences would be severe because it's
Yeah.
like that's a food source.
Yeah.
And Maui was
And she's a
originally
politician.
bald, and they're like, no, no, no. Yeah. And they're like, no, 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 no. His mana comes from his hair. That's his power. That's his aesthetic. You have to keep the hair.
Yeah.
And the final little note that I thought was really cute about, like, in terms of talking about Musker and Clemens' legacy is they actually had to make this movie in a makeshift production office. This was like after Frozen blew up, and it was like, oh, so we're like back. Like
Yeah.
animation at Disney is for real again.
Right.
They decided to completely renovate the Burbank studio. And as a result, Zootopia and Moana, which were working concurrently, had to be done in like a makeshift sort of haphazard studio in North Hollywood. And Musker pointed out, like, you know what's funny? This is literally what happened with The Little Mermaid, where they had closed the studio and we had to make it all in like trailers in Glendale.
Interesting.
All right, where do you want to start?
Oh my goodness. Boy, see, that's always the challenge of doing these deep dives. The beginning?
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you want to just dive into like the story beats first?
Yeah, let's talk about, like this is actually a really good comparison for Raya. And actually, a lot of, or if not most of Disney movies, especially some of the ones that we've talked about a lot. Like, for instance, Princess and the Frog, speaking of, Musker and Clemens. But how to open a story, how to give an introduction, how to deliver the rules and the right information. And like Moana, I guess, I don't know, like in the Raya episode, you have a breakdown of the minutes, which like kudos to you. Did you actually go back and just like watch?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So it's not like, it's a pretty lengthy like introduction before we get into like what the story is, or at least it just seems like there's a lot of different things happen. We have episodes.
Yes. Right. It's about 10 minutes before we get the first like, hey, something's up with the coconuts, man.
Mm-hmm. Have you considered the coconuts lately? Because something's up with them.
Yeah, something went really... Hey, I know you're doing a lot as princess here, but you need to increase your coconut considering budget, because, like, what is this?
Coconuts. That's, like, what their committee meetings are about. Like, that's, like their political, like, when their board hosts, like, a town hall, people are like, I don't know, like, as our leader, that you're really considering all of the coconuts here. And I wrote you a song about it.
That is the one area where, like, the sort of stereotyping of Polynesia gets a bit much. Just the emphasis on the coconut gets a little out of hand. We all love considering the coconut. People, we all love considering the coconut. We all love it. But, like, for 1 minute, maybe we're overdoing it a little bit.
This is, like, okay, no, you're absolutely right. This is kind of, that is reminding me of Pocahontas. Of, like, these people are obsessed with, like, one very specific, crop? And, like, their corn. Lifestyle, like, is, like, surrounded by, like, a resource. Because that's, like, all that their life is.
It is interesting you bring up Pocahontas, because, again, it is interesting to have they did one story about, like, a sort of, like, indigenous people, and then for, like, 10-ish years, they were like, absolutely not. They kind of do it with Brother Bear, but, like, that feels like a punt at best. They're like, this is so unrelated to anything. Mm-hmm. And then they do Moana. And it's so interesting seeing, like, kind of the different approach. I think, honestly, one thing is, again, for all the coconut stuff, like I appreciate that they don't lean into like, I don't know, they don't mysticize the people. The island is actually very like banal and normal.
Mm-hmm.
Like the problem with Pocahontas is it leans into the stereotype of indigenous people being like, oh, we're tree hugging, we have like a connection to nature.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Everything
like,
speaks.
The people of Motunui, yeah, the people of Motunui are connected to nature, but in a more practical, organic way of like, well, we love our island, so we, you know, it's important that the island thrives.
So we take care of it and also each other, and like that's about it. Like we're just sort of like a well-oiled machine here.
Yeah, but God, it is so like, the minute you turn this movie on, it is so damn incredible how like it just completely sucks you in. One, we do the mythology intro. Like I love that we just have this dangling like basic dangling hook, I guess to be accurate, of like.
Dun, 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 dun.
Good evening, friends. Hold on, my tot can't get no respect. But yeah, like I love that we just have this like element as we're going through the movie of like, well, Maui's going to show up eventually, right? Like, you know, you have something to get the audience excited. You have something to get the audience like locked in, and we portray him as like this kind of trickster villain. Like we don't know what he's capable of. We don't know what he's going to do other than what we've seen. Or
really what his intentions are. And like it's kind of adds to the intrigue of like introducing him as like sort of a neutral character of like being flawed, not necessarily being good or bad, like just maybe selfish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like that we kind of like show you where the journey is going to end before we start.
Yeah.
And then we immediately go into this baby Moana, like talking about like the baby characters and how they always want to have the children. Is this, other than Princess and the Frog, is this the best example of it in terms of like nailing what, like, if you're going to show your character as a kid, if you're going to have a longer prologue of like watching a character grow up, is this not kind of the best?
My only issue with it would be that it's like, if anything, it's maybe slightly too on the nose. Because you're right, it does tell you what's going to happen. And Princess and the Frog kind of doesn't.
Right. Okay, I do see that. Well, I actually think they're pretty similar in the sense of, like, both of them are kind of characters internalizing the wrong lesson.
Yeah.
Because, like, I like that a part of this story is her grandma is kind of wrong. Well, not wrong. She's right for the wrong reasons, if that makes sense. Like, one of the things I wanted to talk about as we keep going is I like that both Moana and Maui's stories are a chosen one. Not the chosen one, but they think they're the chosen one.
Yeah.
Like,
they decide themselves that they're, yeah.
Yeah, there's this constant subtext of the ocean picked you for a reason. The ocean picked you for a reason. It had to have picked you for a reason. But we saw the reason. And the reason is just, like, that little bit of empathy.
She's kind,
and
yeah. Oh my god,
yeah.
In my notes I wrote, like, a Cinderella theme of, like, you're deserving because you are kind. That's it. Like,
right.
You didn't do anything special. It's for no reason, except for that you are who you are.
Right, and, like, anyone can be kind. There's plenty of opportunities to be kind. There's other people in the ocean who are probably just as kind. But, like, you showing that spark of potential is what results in you getting a magical chance. Mm-hmm. Like, it is funny thinking about this in the context of Wish being the fact that Wish was supposed to be this, like, amalgamation of everything Disney's taught. And I'm like, this is what Disney's about. Like, you know, a little bit of kindness and a little bit of magic can get you wherever you need to go.
All the way. Mm-hmm.
I also forgot the whole element with the shell. Like, I was so surprised how much of this movie I kind of forgot. Like, I love that they do this simple, like, save the cat thing of, like, this baby could go get a shell that's pretty, or it could save this turtle. Right. And she goes to save the turtle, and that's how we know she's a good
is rewarded with the shell in the end. Like,
yes.
It's, okay, wait. You're kind of walking me into, like, the very, very small handful of criticisms that I have about this movie is that, like, I think it maybe uses a little too many symbols, a little, like, there are too many, what I can only describe as accessories, in this movie. Do you know what I mean by that? Of, like,
I get it. It has a very, like, adventure game logic of, like, you just keep picking up cool things.
You keep picking up stuff. All right, so, yeah, I really like the shell thing, and it pays off at the end of the movie. Like, it ends up being, like, a long-standing, like, symbol. But then we actually have the heart itself, which also is in the same scene. I also feel this way about, like, the, like, gratuitous animal sidekicks that we have, like, two of for some reason. That's too many. Especially since, like, neither of them, like, speak, and there's always one that, like, speaks, right?
Well, my counter to that is coming off of Wish and Raya, which, like, you can easily lay the criticism, and honestly Strange World, of just, like, too many goddamn characters. Just having one animal character who stays on land and one that joins her on the boat, I'm just like, nice. Simple. You barely need the pig in to sell the pig plushies. I know that was a criticism I had of the film originally, but seeing, like, what spawns after, I'm kind of like, God, this feels so refreshing. I guess it is a matter of perspective, isn't it?
I guess they needed, it's animal respectability politics, because it's like this, like, Pua is a good tool to show just how dangerous what she's doing is. It feels really threatening because Pua's just cute. He's not hey, we're just kind of like a clownish character, like that.
He's too dumb to appreciate that he's in constant
he doesn't
peril.
know that he's in danger. Whereas you have this, like, sort of really, really cute, adorable character that you don't want to get hurt, and so you kind of have to put him in peril for, like, one scene, and then be like, that's never going to happen again.
Right. You have him to underline the fact that the ocean is a friend, the ocean is important, it's what connects us all, but it is also a living, sentient thing that you need to have uttered respect, deference, and understanding of. Because if you don't, it will destroy you.
Yeah.
That is one thing. Like, I love the persona. Even the opening scene, I have a little bit of, like, tension as she's getting near the water where I'm like, she's a baby.
I was thinking that. I was like, well, thank God the ocean's sentient, because nobody's supervising this kid.
Right? And I like that it always strikes that balance throughout the entire movie, where the ocean is simultaneously, like, thoughtful
nurturing,
and nuanced and can understand her pain and grief as she has to give up the heart, but also, like, a little bit playful, a little bit trickster, like, it splashes people in the face, it, like, knocks out Maui, but also it is scary. The scenes where, like, you are getting knocked off the boat and are just floating around the water, it's like, if you do not catch up to that boat, you are dead. That thing will sail away and you will be stuck in the middle of nothing until you run out of strength and sink, and that will be it.
Right. Yeah, that scene where she gets trapped underwater, like, she's under the current, like, that's surprisingly violent. I remember when I first saw it being like, whoa, oh my God.
Yeah, and I think that's something, like, and I guess we're just talking about, like, the beginning, because, like, the beginning is about nature. It's about, like, setting up the rules of the world and setting up this connection to nature. And, like, yeah, I think one thing this movie does really, really well is underline, like, and we've talked about this before, like, it's so hard to sell people on a skill in universe. Like, being like, this guy's the best at what he does, this specific niche skill. And, like, you know, because, like, you know, I can see a guy flip a sword around, I can see people flying through the air, but to, like, sell us on, like, no, navigating like this is really, really fucking hard, and you have to be a master of it, or you will die. Like, this movie does such a good job. It's one of the things I love about, and it's something I love about Moana as a character, like, that she is uber competent, she's a good leader, she can run around, she can, like, she fights off the Kakamora, but she has to learn how to do sailing. And I love that ties into the theme of, like, a part of her has been detached. And that gets back to the beginning of, like, where you are, the whole song is about, like, basically from, you know, where you are to how far I go is, like, her being, like, constantly feeling this part of her is missing. She's innately pulled to the water because that's a part of her. She loves her home and her people, but they're missing a piece of themselves. And she, like, wants to be that piece. That's why she keeps going to the water. And the fact that she's had that knowledge missing from her is why she has to learn how to sail.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, like, in general, I do like this movie on that front. I also like that it's a movie that's okay with characters failing. Like, I like that, like, it's okay if their first plan doesn't work. It's okay if they struggle or have fights or things go horribly wrong. Because that's a part of a journey. That's a part of an odyssey. Like, in terms of, like, the Disney princess movies, this is the first one that, like, I feel like one of the few that accurately depicts, like, a teenage, you know, all these characters are supposed to be teenagers. And I like that,
you forget that, because they just get married right away.
Yeah, and adults are weird about them on the interwebs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really like that this movie has like a teenage energy of like, yeah, you're going out for the first time. You're gonna learn some things. You're gonna screw up real bad, but as long as you keep your like, as long as you know where you're going and remember where you've been, you'll be okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, you know what? That's so interesting. Other than like Rapunzel, who's like pointedly sheltered, Moana
Yeah,
is the
where
only
the
one that
joke is she doesn't
feels
know anything about anything.
the world. Yeah, Moana is really the only one that feels childlike, when really all of them are kind of supposed to be childlike. Yeah.
Yeah, but also like, it is such a crazy balance they strike with her in terms of like, yeah, you always have to underline like she is a good leader. Her dad's not wrong. This does suit her. Like, she could be content. That again, that's and we'll talk about that when we get to music. But what's so good about How Far I Go is she's underlining like, if I just stay here, I will be mostly happy.
Yeah.
Like, I love
It'll
this
be
island.
fine. Right.
And like, kind
That's a
of
good
talking
point.
about like, getting back to like the chosen one element. Like, I I love that. Like, I think something that I forgot about is just how much Maui underlines like the god scooped this version of Maui, and like there are different, like every island has its own like sort of twists on Maui, but in general the idea is like, this version is he was abandoned as a child, gets picked up by the gods and anointed a demigod, and Moana says something along the lines of the gods must have picked you for a reason. And I love that it is like two people grappling with the expectations other people put on them and kind of
Right.
like not being whole because of that. At the end of the day, they have to want to save the world because they want to save the world.
Right.
They have to want to be doing what they're doing to want what they're doing. I think the moment that really struck me, and it's an emotional moment, but I didn't really fully appreciate it until I thought about it in this context, is like, as Maui's getting ready to like bail on the quest, Moana's just saying this like line again of "I am Moana of Motunui. You will board my boat." Just this like prefab script she's been given,
Yes.
where it's like, well, this is what a chosen one is supposed to do. This is
Right.
what a chosen one's supposed to say, and Maui just completely ignoring it.
Yeah.
As like both of them just kind of are in the ruins of what other people put on their shoulders.
Right. Exactly. That's a good point.
And it's not until like, and that whole sequence where she reunites with her grandma, it ends with her saying "I am Moana," and then her saying the line again,
defining
but
that.
as like, yeah, redefining that line for her.
That scene is always like the most emotional I get watching it. Like, I don't think I've ever seen it where I haven't like shed a tear during that song.
Oh, yeah.
I am Moana. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, God, it's such a beautiful sequence, and it like, it's just, I think one of the things that hurt this film coming out is compared to Frozen, its themes are a lot quieter, or at least it doesn't
Absolutely.
like spell them out. Again, like, and it's so interesting comparing it to its peers, because like, you know, Frozen really spells out like, oh, you can't marry the first guy you meet, and like, oh, true love between sisters.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
matters. Yeah.
Do you hear that, Cinema Sins? We're different now.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, to under like, again, not to bully Raya, but so much of like the discourse about Raya is just like, you know, hammering home trust, 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 take the first step, trust, trust,
Yeah.
trust. Or like alternatively, like, you know, Encanto underlines its themes pretty heavily, but gives you different flavors and colors of it. Like you get to see, it's a big enough ensemble that like it feels fresh every time you get
That's
like,
an odyssey.
oh, this is,
yeah.
yeah, the burden of generational expectations in the shade. In the shade.
Yeah,
in
this
the
is what it
shade.
looks like on
Weirdly,
this
is
person.
also a movie.
And on that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weirdly, this movie is also about generational expectations.
That's true. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I was going to say something in the beginning about like how like what it sort of adds to actually make the opening monologue being read by the grandmother and not the lead. And I guess you sort of walked me into that of Moana's like destiny, even the one that is closest to what she wants for herself, still like coming from a third party, still still being motivated and encouraged like by somebody else outside of herself.
Right. Yeah. Again, she is being fed from the beginning. You are the chosen one.
Yeah,
You know, I'm telling this story to everyone, but I'm kind of
but I'm
winking
winking
at
at
you.
you. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
going to be you. It has to be you.
Yeah,
Like, and I love this film took a lot of different shapes and forms over time. Taika Waititi wrote a script of it.
No kidding, really. I didn't know that.
Yeah, his version was way more. His version, the idea was she was one of like 5 siblings and they were all brothers, so there was also the gender element.
Oh,
But like
gotcha.
Disney was just like, this is played out. We already did the gender thing with Mulan.
Yeah.
Let's try something different.
Right.
He seems like he's on good terms, but he's made the joke of like, yeah, the only thing they kept is exterior ocean.
Right. I love Taika Waititi.
But yeah, and I do like that, like, her grandma does kind of also have a character arc of being like, yeah, it was wrong of me to put that burden on your shoulders. Mm-hmm. Like, it was kind of an objectively manipulative thing I did.
I sure did, and then
like,
I didn't have to go and die.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to die thinking I was, I set you, the chosen one, on her quest.
Right.
Is this a good opportunity? Because, like, I feel like we'll talk about other story beats as we talk about the music. Do you want to transition into the music a little bit?
Oh, yeah. Because there's a lot of
So,
good
as we
tidbits
mentioned,
the guy who did Hamilton. Where does this fall in the Hamilton timeline? Has it already been on?
Okay, Hamilton didn't exist yet. By the time he wrote the music for this, Hamilton was a theory, not finished.
Gotcha.
My understanding is they brought him along at some point, like post In the Heights, which, if I'm remembering correctly, In the Heights was like 2010.
Yeah.
Yeah, which it is really funny, like the perspective on like time for all these things. People don't.
Right.
I feel like people just don't appreciate how long things are in production. But yeah,
like he did that. What did he go? He did when he first sang like the Alexander Hamilton at the White House for the Obama. That was 2011, and like that feels
right.
Like, so, like, that's the beginning of Hamilton. 2011. That's a long time.
But yeah, In the Heights comes out in 2008, and, like, as Disney is wont to do, they see some guy with his, like, composer doing Little Shop of Horrors, and he's like, hey, we're going to bring you in. We have a couple different project ideas. One's about a mermaid. Do you have anything for that? Also, like, yeah, they see this guy who basically, who was in college around 2005, and then within 3 years wins the Best Musical Tony for his, like, innovative rap story about all these characters living in Washington Heights, New York.
Right.
And they're like, hey, you want to come in? And it's funny because in a lot of, like, the behind-the-scenes stuff, people talk about, like, yeah, as he's working on this, he keeps talking about this concept album he's working on about, like, presidents, I guess.
Yeah, which sounds so stupid.
And then right, it is so funny. Yeah, when you say it out loud. Well, and it's like Hamilton has such a messy reputation now because, like, again, in terms of time capsules, it truly came out like at the last possible moment it could have came out.
Oh yeah,
where people would
without
fuck
question,
with it.
Right.
But yeah, the mythology of that, like, 2011 poetry thing, they wanted him to do stuff from In the Heights, and then he just goes, actually, can I do a new thing? And he mentions, like, I'm going to do a song from something I'm working on about one of the greatest rap beefs of all time, or like a story that is quintessential rap. Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, and everyone starts cackling, and he goes, "You laugh."
Yeah.
And like, yeah, that was history defining in terms of like how this Against All Odds musical worked. And then Trump got elected, and suddenly this, like, hey, isn't America great?
Means
sort
something.
Of discourse imploded.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But yeah, and then it is so funny because we're riding off the high of Hamilton, and so much of, like, the excitement around this movie was like, oh, this is his follow-up. When in reality, they were going concurrently.
Right, yeah. And it's so, like, I mean, as you know, like, I'm a big Hamilton fan, and there is kind of, like, a distinct change in Lin-Manuel's, like, work before and after Hamilton, where, like, you could tell that people are really asking him to, like, do the Hamilton thing. Like, and this feels very much like the predecessor to his style and cadence of rap, where he wasn't doing sort of like the, as they call it, like, lyrical miracle stuff, where it's like, it's really intricate with, like, really intricate rhythmic patterns and things like that. It was much simpler, and there's only, like, one rap section.
I do think it is something that gets lost in the discourse about Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's like, mainstream discourse wants to distill him to just being, oh, rap. He adds rap to things. He's the rapper.
He's the hip-hop guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he adds that urban flavor.
Yeah.
And then the one black guy in the
Boots
meeting
and
is just
cats
like,
and boots and cats. Right, yeah, exactly.
yeah, just like, okay, does someone else want to be in this office?
Yeah.
But yeah, Lin is a theater kid. You know, his
Right.
choice of rap music obfuscates that what makes him great is he is an absolute
He's a
master of the craft, and he
classically trained.
understands. Yeah, he understands every little thing a musical needs to work, and he's good at bringing those things out. And I would argue this might be his master. This and Encanto are kind of his master classes on that.
Right. Especially Encanto. I mean, we've said this before about Encanto, of it feeling like a Broadway musical. It functions like a Broadway musical.
It's actually insane they haven't already greenlit that. Like, they've been trying to make Hercules work on Broadway for like 5 years now, and they
Right.
haven't even touched this.
Right. Yeah.
Side tangent, I'd be remiss if we did not acknowledge that Samoan-born composer Apataya Foe also wrote music for this. They worked in
Yes.
conjunction. Just because, like, I know it's easier to talk about Hamilton or Lin
Yeah.
because he's the flashier name and he's the lyricist, but I would be remiss if we
We
did
need
not
the cultural
acknowledge. They
reference.
did,
What do
yeah.
you think
to
about
Disney's credit in terms of like the sort of Oceanic Trust thing, they did follow good on bringing in a Polynesian musician.
That's true. Although I have to say, like, from the research that I've done about like how actual like audiences of Polynesian descent feel about Moana, so many of the criticisms were about the music, actually. It's and they say that like it doesn't sound like, not that it doesn't sound like their cultural music, but that apparently like there was one specific quote of somebody saying like Polynesian choirs like are hundreds of people. Like they have like a massive, like all encompassing like wall of sound kind of like quality. And that that they felt that the music was like cutesy and not
Disneyfied.
Disneyfied. Yeah, exactly. Like it's there, you can hear it, but it isn't quite authentic enough. How do you feel about Lynn actually like singing on the We Know the Way track? Or
God,
yeah, that's the name of the song.
it is so funny that, like, in the behind the scenes stuff, there is a clip where John Hawaiian Shirt Lassiter is telling Lynn, "We like your track so much, we're going to keep it on." And then he immediately hugs Lynn, and I'm just like, man, he really just does not fucking respect personal space.
No.
Man, the flags were there. Again, I'm reticent to bring up the bit where he met Miyazaki, and Miyazaki was so clearly going for a handshake and gets squeezed in a way that man has never, like, that man...
Never touched anybody.
No, absolutely not. It is interesting because it is like the one sort of... It is sort of the one, like, cultural anachronistic moment of having, like, an omniscient voice singing this. And I am, like...
Yeah.
On one hand, I am kind of, like... I get it. Because it's, like, this guy just wrote Hamilton. He's going for his EGOT. You let him do the song.
Right.
But then I'm also, like... Yeah, it's kind of a weird look. It just kind of, like, adds a weird sort of...
A color.
For how hard and how strident you guys are about cultural specificity, it is weird that you let this happen.
Yeah, it feels weird, but it's like one of those things that just gets accepted unquestioned until now.
But, and it's a shame because I do love the song. It kind of
Me
is
too.
like,
It's one of
I'd
my
argue it's
favorites.
yeah, it is kind of the work version of like work song for this in terms of like the
Right.
world building song, and yet it's the third song in the movie.
Yeah. And it's like it's I was thinking about that earlier when we were talking about the intro of like Disney movies are so varied but all follow a same structure, because I almost described Where You Are as a hi-ho song. And it is. Like that is the like, here's the rhythm, here's the status quo, here's what you need to understand. Yeah.
Coconuts.
That's all. That's it. Coconuts.
Yeah, that's it actually.
That's the only thing.
Wow, this is easier than I thought. All right,
Yeah,
great
I
job,
could be
everyone.
chief.
Early lunch.
Right.
But it's actually kind of a devious structure of like status quo. Like, this is where Moana is. She's happy, but ... She sings this song where she's like, "What is wrong with me? Why can't I just be happy? Why can't I be content?" I do love the original version of this was a song called More. And there is a little riff, I wish I could have crowbarred into how far I'll go, of I count the steps from one half side of my island to the other, 100 steps from my bed to the sea. Like, I like that idea of, like, oh, it is literally a small space. Like,
Yeah.
it feels too small. And then we go into, we know the way of, like, this is the piece you've been missing. It's right here. This is what you should be doing. And all of them kind of tie together to be, like, the themes of this movie, to be the, like, message of this movie.
Right.
And they don't fight each other. They all kind of agree on the same thing.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I do think that is one of the nice things about this movie is, like, the characters, like, the conflict is, like, I don't know, it's just nice that, like, you know, deep down, all of them want this. Like, they're not fighting, like, the conflict isn't, like, huge, unbearable generational divides. It is just, like, no, it's not safe out in the water anymore. I would like it to be different, too, but that's not how it is. And Moana just being young enough to, like, be like, well, I'm going to make it right.
Right.
Come hell or high water.
Right. What's your, like, just for farts and toots, as you said earlier, what's your favorite song?
Oh, that actually might be borderline impossible.
And why is it Shiny?
Shiny is perfect. Honestly, if there's one criticism I have of this movie is we needed, like, 10 more minutes in the realm of the monsters just to, like, flesh it out a little bit. Like, it feels like... And there was another song in there. There was a song called Warrior Face, which was about the haka. And I kind of like that because it's about, like, putting on airs and, like, faking it till you make it, which is kind of how both of these characters have been going.
Right.
But yes, Shiny is perfect because it is so different than everything else. Again, it's the idea of, like, magical and supernatural creatures in Disney movies have a different rhythm and cadence that doesn't fit in with the rest of the world.
Right, exactly.
Like, everything else is arch and kind of, like, mythical and fairy tale. But then you just have these little weirdos who just do their own thing. And it doesn't work, but it does. And yes. It also, like, ties in with one of my things of just, like... Again, this is another movie that simultaneously knows really well how to use CGI. Like, what the advantages of CGI are. But also understands the hand-drawn element. We talked about it with Encanto. The idea of, like... Encanto lets there be dream logic to the musical sections. We're not stuck in a physical space. We can be poofing from place to place while we're talking about Bruno.
Right,
like,
that's
all the
true.
lights can go out, and it can just be this weird spotlight where people are dancing around for
Where
some
suddenly
reason.
everybody's in the same house. Yeah.
Yeah, and Shiny is the best example of that, because simultaneously, like, it does a lot of cool stuff with CGI in terms of, like, underlining the scale, underlining that Maui is very small compared to this goddamn crowd.
Right.
But then also you have these moments where it'll be, like, all the lights will go out except his creepy, glowy little eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even just him as a character, like, what they do with him
It's
as
a great
an animated
performance,
character,
yeah.
just squishing and squashing and, like, stretching, I'm like, this is the advantage of having, like, two guys who are on the cutting edge of Disney hand-drawn animation, being like, all right, well, what can we do with this other thing?
Right.
But if I had to... The song that really struck me is, like, the final little bit she sings to Ka at the end.
Yes. Which is, like,
Because
kind
I
of a
like that it's
reprise
simultaneously
of
yeah.
her infant.
It's not a reprise of any specific song, but it kind of reprises all of them.
It's a, like, I don't know if it's a reprise, but it's like there's an intro song that's like it's sung by another singer, like, in the native language, and
Yes.
it's while she's with the ocean, and like Moana, like, I guess is like rewriting over that track.
Something about the line, "They've stolen the heart from inside you," I'm just like, ooh, man, that's beautiful. Mm-hmm. But also, that is, again, like, comparing this to, like, there's such a neat natural line of, like, Lynn's talents from Encanto to this. Understanding, like, no, it's not a boss fight. It has to end on music.
Yeah.
And that works so perfectly with the themes of, like, you know, what you think you have to do isn't what you have to do. Mm-hmm. You know, meeting people, you know, meeting the world with kindness, having a reverence for nature. All of these seem so perfectly captured in, no, we're not going to fight the lava monster. We're going to stop and appreciate what the lava monster is and make peace with it.
Right. And that's, because you know what always stood out to me is the way that scene ends when she, like, puts her face on Taka. Like, she's, like, literally sort of, like, does this affectionate, like, nudging, like, where they have this, like, closed-eyed moment. And that always struck me of, like, being like, that's a lava monster.
Right.
But
like,
that being
this
the
character
point.
who is burned who's so powerful she destroyed a god-given like basically sword,
Yeah.
like, and you're putting your head on it. Like,
Yeah.
again, Moana was special because she showed kindness at a young age. Of course she has to end with the ocean parting so she can show another creature kindness.
Yes. Yeah,
Again,
exactly.
fucking pays out like a slot machine.
Yes.
This movie's so close to fucking perfect. That's insane that this wasn't immediately rapturous applause.
What would make it like perfect?
I really do think it's just like maybe one more scene in the realm of the monsters. I do feel like we get over that episode a little too quickly.
Yeah, we come in and out of that one, yeah.
Right. Like, it is a very episodic in a way that makes sense, because it's like, well, it's an odyssey. We're literally on the ocean. You know, you're on a quest. You got to find the thing. But I do think you still need one more quest that's just a pinch longer.
I think I understand that, yeah. I think I've always been, like, I always get frustrated with the sort of cliche of, like, having a falling out with your partner.
Right.
And that's just a misunderstanding. Yeah.
See, I used to hate that, but when I really started to think about the fact that she keeps saying that I am Moana of Motunui bit, like, that I appreciate true. That Maui's arc is basically just a heightened version of Moana's arc. Like, I was like, where it's like, no, you can't be obsessed with all this because the gods, like, you're doing all this shit because you think you have to impress the, gods and people. In reality is you just gotta do what's right for you, man.
Yeah, pretty much.
It can't be about adoration. It can't be about proving yourself. It has to be about, like, well, what do you want?
Right. Yeah. Do you know? Have you stopped to think? Yeah.
Yeah. I also love that ending little song because I like that, like, the movie does such a good job of telling story through, like, the score, too. Like, there's effectively musical sequences that aren't songs.
Yes.
Like, the beginning with this beautiful chorus, or, like, when they're doing the little training montage where he's learning how to use his hook again and she's learning how to wayfind.
I love that one. Yeah.
Right.
That's one I listen to a lot, like, on the soundtrack.
Right. And it just has just the right energy. Just, like, little moments like that. I'm like, it's so devious how you've effectively squeezed... Because, like, again, compared to a Broadway musical, a Disney musical has, like, a quarter of the songs, maybe. Like, if you were to put it on a playbill, it would be, like, a chunk of the page compared to what you see in a Broadway show. But the fact that they're able to basically squeeze more songs in but not actually have songs.
Right.
It's great. I love it.
Yeah. Do more of that.
It's awesome. It's perfect. It's crazy. I love it. Well, while we're kind of like bouncing around, I also want to like, what do you think, what makes a good I Want song? Because I would argue How Far I Go has quietly become one of the iconic ones, despite like, I feel like it didn't get as much play at first.
It didn't. Yeah, and it still doesn't. That's a really good question.
But now I feel like it's iconic.
I think it's motivation. Like, it's honestly, it's not really the song itself. All I Want songs are designed to be kind of like radio worthy, but or at least just like sung by some other like famous pop singer, you know. Right. But like I think
Bolton, like
Celine Dion.
I could go the distance.
Yes, exactly like that. I actually think it's motivation. Like it's like we've always talked about Tiana having the best I Want song, even though almost nobody knows what that like, and that's another conversation about why people don't appreciate that movie enough. But like
it always comes back, much like the ocean always brings you home.
Racism.
Talking about Disney movies always brings us back to you fuckers didn't watch Princess and the Frog, and now everything's worse. That timeline, Trump doesn't win, COVID never happens, everything's better.
Exactly. But it is sort of like the intent behind what that person is asking for. That kind of, like, at least for the two of us in all the conversations that we've had, has sort of colored, like, the way we think about an I Want song. There is, like, maybe it also just has to do with, like, the sense of, like, innocence behind wanting something. I think Moana's Want song is so effective because, like, it is, it's the first time in the movie that she is, like, totally alone in a place where it seems like it's sort of, like, an open air. Like, there's sort of no, like too many structural boundary, like, where it's just, like, people are everywhere. And she's, like, they all know her. They're, like, sort of have, like, a reverence towards her. And this is her first time in like isolation.
That is an interesting point, because it really is interesting how much of the beginning, like, she's in a school group to start, and then she's immediately put on like the pedestal and being shown around.
Yeah.
Like, this is what you. This is stuff
You're
you
the
gotta learn to be
queen.
a cool queen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bop, 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 coconuts. Bop, 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 more coconuts. All we talk about is coconuts.
Coconuts,
Coconuts. And then, yeah, it's, and then it's like, hold on, pause. What do you actually want?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's challenging because, like, so many I Want songs kind of have similar rhythms or beats in terms of, like, it always has to be about, like, I want more, which I think it's so funny. The original version of the song was called just More, where it's like, yeah, just spell it out.
Give me more. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I want a great adventure in the great wide somewhere.
I want to be
you know,
where the
just around
people are.
Bend. Yeah, I want to be where the people are. I guess Reflection's different, but that whole movie's different.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I want to open
like,
a restaurant.
When Will My Life Begin? I'm so close to opening a restaurant.
If only this town weren't so racist, I could have my own restaurant.
Yeah, I'm like a nose hair away, and that nose hair is centuries of racism
Yeah.
and racial resentment bound
Exactly.
from like 12 or 13 centuries old factors, frankly. But yeah, like, I think it's good because it's like, I don't know, it's just such a good job of balancing all of like the story beats, all of what we've been grappling with the whole movie, and kind of like, again, it's also great because I love how much of like the metaphor is both like metaphor and literal. Like, she wants to travel. She has to get out there. She has to go far. She has to go beyond the reef, both in a literal sense but a metaphoric sense.
Right.
I mean, and that kind of just leads us right in naturally to our leads. One, like, you really don't appreciate, like, all of the Disney princesses are actually like in their 20s and 30s. Having an actual teenager be your princess is a bold testrategy, and it is probably the best thing Disney has ever done.
Right. Yeah, we were talking about Ali Carvalho. Like, I think I said to you, like, it's honestly it still baffles me that she was kind of like plucked from school, like,
Yes.
that this is like her very first gig ever.
Right. It is just like crazy how much, like, not just that she's a good singer, because there's a lot of great singers out there, but just like her comedic delivery, just her range of acting, like some of the little asides she makes where she's talking about hey and just being like, yeah, sometimes it's deep down almost non-existent, like just little shit like that. She's so good in this movie, even though she was like, what, 15 when she was recording this?
Yeah, something like that. That part gets me. Yeah
and the sort of, it is kind of insane. I mean, it is just the perfect timing of, like, you want to do a story set in Polynesia, and the biggest actor on the planet right now is Polynesian. I would argue this is the last great rock performance.
Really? That's interesting.
Because I'm just trying to think of what else he's been in, and it's like, you know, he's in more of the Fast sequels that keep having diminishing returns.
All of his characters are himself. Like, he's...
Yeah, but this is the one time, like, before, there was a point where his characters were characters, and this is an example of that, where it's like, yeah, it's kind of The Rock, like, they use his persona, but, like, you know, he has nuance and depth, and he has, like, character stuff going on.
Right,
it's not just, Dwayne.
It's not just, do you smell what The Rock is cooking?
Which is funny because, like, with the WWE stuff that's coming up for the 40th anniversary of WrestleMania, they've gone all in on making him just the biggest heel in history of, like, he's basically interfering with the most important match of all time. And, like, he's really leaning into scumbaggery. And I'm like, sincerely, this is the best thing that could have ever happened for your career, Rock.
Right.
Like, you have so much life. This is, like, you're not phoning this in. You are locked in. I'm like, and now he's talking about doing a deal with A24. I think he's realized has to, like, branch out a little bit. He has to, like, you know, let himself be molded again by actors.
Right.
And just in general, it's funny because I had, like, the character part of, I mean, I can make the point of Jermaine Clemens, Tamatoa also being someone who puts on airs and is, like, faking it till they make it. I love that this,
but in sort of like a goofus way.
Yeah, in a goofus way, where it's like, well, I'm the shiniest thing in this realm of horrifying beasts, so, okay.
So there you go.
I love that there's just the subtext of you got to leave your hometown, and you realize, oh, no one is, you know, everyone's faking it till they make it. Like, everyone's putting on airs.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like a subtle thing I really appreciate. But this is a weirdly small ensemble. Like, we have like 3 or 4 named characters, and then the minute we get on this
Yeah.
boat, it's really just them.
Right, exactly. We have
And
I'm unfamiliar with the actor who like plays her father, but like Nicole Scherzinger is in this for someone. I mean, at least like you can tell that they were trying to make an attempt at like being culturally accurate here.
yes, where if Raya had a problem where they like played fast and loose with Asia, this
Yeah.
did not have that problem. Tamora Morrison, he's Boba Fett. He's in a lot of different things. Love
okay.
him. Iconic voice. Yeah, and like honestly, I don't have much more to say about Moana as a character because we kind of did cover it.
Right. Yeah.
I just think, this movie was either going to crash and burn on how this 14-year-old interacted with like this larger than life man, and by combination of great direction and The Rock being charismatic, like both of them just play off each other perfectly. Like it could have
Oh
been.
yeah.
If one problem with modern Disney movies is there's just way too many characters, like the opposite effect could have happened here, where it's like it gets samey and old. But no, I appreciate how much nuance it has. I appreciate that they find different beats that are both funny and soft. The whole bit with the Kakamora is great because I love Maui finally does this cool
love
hero
that
thing,
scene.
and then he's like, "Cool, I'm getting the fuck out of here."
Right.
I have no
yeah,
attachment to
immediately
any
is
of
like
this.
bye. Yeah. It's almost refreshing to have like a very selfish character.
Yeah, like I like that they actually let him be a scumbag. I like that they
Right.
actually let him suck a little bit.
Right.
And yeah, and even though The Rock can't sing, he does get a great song as a result of that.
Can he not sing? I mean, I don't know. He did like. I think he was good enough, and like, well, yeah, they wrote a song for him that didn't require go the distance type singing.
Yeah. Again, it's the Robin Williams thing of can he hit the right note?
Yeah, can he just
Well,
be in the
yes.
ballpark? Yeah, he can.
Yeah. Can he get close enough that like the energy and charm of animation will carry it?
Right, exactly. Good point.
And like even that I also love that because it has the hand-drawn segment. And again, it's just like
Yes, I love the tattoo stuff. Oh,
Yes.
I forgot all about like the running tattoo thing. Yeah.
yes, which I love again because it's both like a funny bit but also an important morality thing of like Maui literally has a chip on his shoulder in that all of his tattoos are earned by doing cool shit. So he feels like he has to keep getting cool shit because like again, they're playing in a tricky cultural space where it's like it really tattoos really matter for Polynesian cultures. It's like
Right.
you have to earn this shit. And I love that they make that a part of his character. He has this chip on his shoulder where it's like, well, I have to have the most tattoos because I have to be the best guy.
Right, exactly.
And having Moana get one at the end of just like a little Moana on a boat, I'm just like, I forgot that whole bit. And that's the part that actually really got me this time around because I'm just like,
Really?
the kid did it.
Yeah.
That's Maui's girl.
She really did it, yeah.
But yeah, like I like that these guys keep the sword alive of hand-drawn animation, even though making a hand-drawn animated film on a CGI character sounds insane when you say it out loud.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And even just the little things like the prologue or like when you're welcome, just having like hand-drawn backgrounds. It's like, again, these art forms don't have to be enemies. They can work
Right.
together to make really cool shit.
Right, exactly.
I don't really have any other notes other than just talking about like the aftermath of this movie.
The aftermath, okay. Yeah, what
Yeah.
you got?
Yeah. So as we're kind of wrapping up, I do like to talk about the legacy of this movie. This movie's legacy is kind of, for the longest time, was kind of like The Bridesmaid and not The Bride. Like it made
That's
$600
true.
million. It was the 12th highest grossing movie of the year. Like it made money. It didn't make Frozen money, but maybe it was wrong to expect that from every movie. The only problem is Zootopia, which came out in the spring and summer, made $1 billion. And it got really great reviews. People appreciated it. There was a lot of discourse about like the cultural stuff, particularly like, the stereotyping of coconuts, that like horribly ill-advised Maui bodysuit. Have to imagine they didn't send the marketing team to Fiji.
No.
And even just like the Kakamora, as fun a bit as that is, where I'm like, this is just like cool adventure stuff,
romp.
and I appreciate that we can, again, talking about breaking the mold, it's like, all right, well, we can't just do a princess story again. Why not do like sort of an action adventure version of that?
Right.
And then we'll try it again with Raya to diminishing returns. But like, Kakamora kind of playing on like stereotypes of like Polynesian people and like pygmy shit.
Gotcha.
But like, I'd argue they sidestep it by just really leaning into the fact that they are actual coconut
Yeah,
people.
and you can punt them. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and it like got positive reviews, but at the end of the day, it lost Best Animated Film to Zootopia, which man,
Ugh,
what a weird.
wow.
It's insane that like, it is insane that like the stuff that like we talk about like the Trump of it all hurting this movie that didn't hurt this. Like, how is this between Hamilton, Moana, and Zootopia? How is Zootopia the one that
I don't
dodged the
know.
bullets?
I don't know how Zootopia was in the same conversation as this.
It's a very different time. Our brain, truly, our brains were just so fucked up from that year.
Right. Crazy.
But yeah, and like then it's like, well, at least it'll win song. Lin-Manuel Miranda, this is his anointment. He will be the youngest man to ever win an EGOT.
Right.
And the Oscar goes to La La Land, and everyone's like,
Ugh.
oh,
Here we
City
are.
of Stars. That's not even the good song from that musical.
Right. Yeah.
And my note truly was just like, it literally released in one of the 3 or 4 worst periods of time it could have in the 21st century, where truly it just got
Yeah.
sucked into a void.
But then that means it's
and
sort of
yeah.
it like I feel like there was a quick turnaround, and then it like a year or two, like 2 years even after the fact, it had like its own sort of renaissance of suddenly people
Oh,
like
yeah.
are talking about this like Frozen.
Yeah, I would argue what hurt it at first was it had to be in the Shadow of the Frozen. It was the first princess movie since Frozen. And then it weirdly surpassed it. They always brag about the fact that it always has the best numbers on Disney Plus. You know, they've put the attraction, that way of water attraction in the parks. They've done
Right.
so many little different things with Moana to the point where it just became inconscionable not to put a sequel to it in theaters.
Right.
Whether or not that sequel will be good, who knows? And
Stay
that's
tuned.
a topic for another
Yeah.
day.
Right.
Yeah, stay tuned. We're absolutely covering it. But like, yeah, it is kind of it is kind of a nice story because like, you know, Musker and Clemens kind of defined this era of Disney. Like almost everything we associate with Disney princesses, with Disney movies, with Disney musicals, kind of started with them, Howard Ashman, and Alan Menken, all coming together and making a story about a mermaid who happened to be tiny.
Right.
And you know, they kind of were going out on like, you know, their last 2 films were Treasure Planet, which just kind of got left in the dirt, and Princess and the Frog, that a lot of people loved, but like didn't get the sort of rapturous applause of their previous work. To kind of go out on top, arguably making their best movie, it's a nice send-off for Legends.
Yeah, I would agree.
And until we're back on that water, looking out at the great sea, I'm Carter.
And I'm Sydney.
Have a magical day.
Thanks for listening.